Okay. Um, I am only going to sort of lay down uh, the experience with the classroom over the past couple of years, and then we'll sort of discuss other things as well. My primary interest has been the classroom for a long time now. I'm very preoccupied with the classroom as a space, as a stage, as a platform, as a place of magic, as a place of uncovering stories, fighting, battleground, etc., etc. Um, I'm interested in the classroom as a space because I'm very curious about how the transformation happened. As a student, I was terrified of it. I hated the classroom. I Not only because children normally don't like schools, but also because uh, much of what happens in the classroom in schools is essentially a space of becoming somebody who knows things. But if you went to a school where uh, there was very little learning happening and a lot of uh, there was always a sense that the people who know things like science and math will forever know it all their lives, and the people who didn't know these things are never going to learn. So the sense of finality in the classroom was very morose. That's why I dreaded it all through my childhood. I hated the classroom because it never seemed like I could become somebody who's getting something out of it. Friendships were a big failure. Teachers in schools were somewhere invested in the smart students. They did things like, they have people tend to have this habit of doing tutor work for weak students, and that easily recognized and identified students who are not smart enough. And so there are many things that the Indian education system does with the classroom that make us feel very lousy about ourselves. Um, Cut to years later, when I became a teacher, I was still afraid of the classroom, but um, I'm not afraid of it anymore, and I'm interested in why this change has happened. And it's not necessarily coming from the fact that because I've become a teacher now, I no longer need to fear it. I actually have more reason to fear it if I am the teacher in the classroom, especially if I dreaded it having been a student. Um, but I think the title of the talk is today called The Teacher as a Student. And I'm here maybe today only to clarify for myself why the journey from becoming a student to a teacher was essentially a return to becoming a student in order to become the teacher. That I find fascinating. I find that fascinating because in the first few years of teaching, and teaching is also one of those things where, like maybe many other occupations and professions, there's no template. There's nobody to tell you how to teach. You learn to do it by imitating your teachers. You learn to do it by maybe watching films, and if there are films on teaching, then yeah, so that's how you begin to teach. um but the idea that the teacher has all the answers, or the teacher is supposed to be smarter than the student, were all very firmly are all still very rooted in the Indian classroom. The idea of how we visualize the teacher. um, this became a big struggle initially because I was definitely not smarter than my students when I began, as maybe still I'm not. I couldn't figure out how to get them to take me seriously. And for many young female teachers today, this is a problem, not knowing how to get students to take you seriously. Everything from who they consider teacher enough to wish in the morning. Um, so, in the first few years, it was okay if students didn't really look at me as a teacher, because on friendship day, they would come and say happy friendship day. So I thought that was cool. Uh, but that also meant that on teachers' day, they don't even look at you. So in the first few years, I thought I had to be really bothered by this because there was something that was not working for me in the class. The idea that I still need to have all the answers, I need to speak a certain kind of English. All of these were uh, all of these were struggles. In the department where I teach at St. Joseph's University, the English department, it's had a long-standing practice of not relying that much on the textbook to do the teaching. And possibly this is one of the things that freed me as a teacher, because for the first time I was engaging with the classroom where I was the textbook and there is no textbook for them to rely on. They had to listen to me, I had to listen to them for any kind of learning to happen. It was and even to this day our battle with the rest of the admin and the rest of the department and the rest of the college seems to be this, that we are still defending our right to not have a textbook, because in an English classroom if you don't have a textbook, half the world wants to know how are you teaching them grammar, how are you teaching them letter writing. And we are out here saying we are not here to teach letter writing or grammar, we teach grammar through reading and writing. We teach them how to read, we teach them how to write, and really that becomes a lesson in life in itself. Mm. But here's one of the first things that happened when this no textbook in the classroom empowered me to it kept me on my toes, which meant that if I couldn't rely on a poem in the textbook every day to teach and give them a lesson plan, I had to do that work outside the classroom. So it made me a reader for life. And I think today in the Indian classroom, I'm very interested in knowing what it actually means to read. How are we reading today? Are we still reading the same way we did 5 years ago? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Um, for the longest time, I think I should say this now openly, I had a big problem with the word pedagogy because I couldn't understand it. I have had a big battle with half of these words like pedagogy, subaltern, invisibilization, epistemology, etc., etc. Not because they are difficult sounding words, but because every time I encounter them, I still have to go back and look at what they mean. Um, and also because somewhere down the line, we have emptied all meaning from these words. So I no longer know what they mean. Um, to give you a more personal anecdote, I once returned from a scholarship at Seattle where we were studying contemporary American literature. And I was asked in my department to, when I came back, to make a small presentation of what I did for 2 months. So I put together a bunch of slides, talked to them about my experiences there. We looked at the texts I was doing. I also told them about the Ambedkar study circle I was able to meet in San Francisco, etc., etc. It was a very fun kind of collegial atmosphere there. So that was what my slideshow was about. At the end of the presentation, uh, uh, an academic who was my colleague asked me, "But you haven't really talked much about the pedagogy." And this was years ago, and I was still trying to grapple with the word pedagogy. So I stared at her, and she said, "Yes, what about the pedagogy?" And I had the feeling that some of us do, where you wish you had a pie in your hand so you could stuff it in someone's face. I bemoaned the lack of a pie in my hand because I just wanted to stick it in this woman's face. Because here I was talking about all of the learnings that had happened throughout this 2 month long internship program. And I was focusing on things like close reading and this moment in this seminar when this happened, and talking about race and caste. And all of that is definitely a part of the pedagogy. But because I didn't speak about it in a more academic way, she had a problem with that. And today I'm wondering what it means to sound academic. So many of my students are afraid of academic writing, and so am I. And when we think of ourselves as teachers in the classroom today, It becomes our responsibility somewhere to address this fear. Why is there so much anxiety about academic writing? Uh, that's one question to ask. And the other question to ask is, why is there so much of an uproar about academic writing? Uh, as teachers, I think we also know that we all have these things called API scores that we need to be very acutely aware of. Because that's what decides your promotions in the university, especially if those of you who are teaching here and if you are teaching at colleges or universities. Uh, Based on how many publications you have, based on what your API score is, your qualification, your number of presentations, etc., etc. Uh, I think this is one of the biggest hurdle in Indian academia today. That as teachers, we no longer know where to put our energy into. Um, I've I'm always I mean I've been in touch with colleagues in my department who have done zero work for themselves across decades because their investment has been in the classroom since day one, whether it's designing curriculum or designing syllabus or making learning fun for students, putting all of the energy inside the syllabus so the student has fun for all of the 3 years. And at the end of the decade, they have very little to show for themselves. How many papers have you published? Zero. But that's what counts everywhere else. But I know that this person has designed the curriculum with so much attention to detail. Unfortunately, Indian academia doesn't measure the kinds of things that you do there. How much energy you're putting inside. Let's say a small event where you invited a writer and there are students asking the writer questions. Um, I'm not saying we need a more accurate measurement for teachers at this point, but I'm interested in debunking some of these words that are related to academia. Um, Words that tend to alienate some section of students in the classroom simply because of what they mean and where they come from. Uh, I teach a paper on resisting caste for postgraduate students. And it's in this class that I encounter some of the toughest questions of academia at the moment. Here in this class, we get them to write a paper of autoethnographic effort, which means that they have to go back home and ask very uncomfortable questions to their parents and relatives about caste, about where they come from. And every student must do this, regardless of who they are. But these are students who are learning to do autoethnography in the third semester. In the first year, they've done their regular research paper, their regular academic writing, framing a research question, methodology, blah, 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 all of that. And in the third semester, they feel a little stumped because none of the things that they've been trained for in the first year is helping them out now because this is an autoethnography paper. They are the subjects themselves. They feel a little lost about how they can ask questions that are this personal and convert the personal into academic. Um, and this is where I find this is also something I find very interesting. I find this interesting because academic writing is not going to help them here at this point. Um, because autoethnography forces you to reveal to the reader how you think about yourself and your community. Academic writing can't help you. And they whine and complain about how they are feeling very alone and very lost, and autoethnography doesn't make sense to them. Is it even valid in India? Isn't this a Western thing? All of these questions start coming. Um, and they feel this desire to feel that a template is going to solve all my problems for me, which are academic in nature, is something that I think we need to do away with. Um, I'm talking about academic writing here also because uh, as young teachers, when you get into this profession, it's one of the few things that everyone is going to quickly ask you. How many papers have you published this year? Uh, how many presentations have you done? And somewhere the fun of discovering something, discovering a writer, talking about this writer in your classroom, that gets eliminated. Um, and much of the pressure to perform as teachers and researchers. I should maybe also now introduce the word Savarna Indian academia is really fruitless. So I tried to do the opposite thing, which was to only focus on my own pleasure in the classroom and not worry about anything else. In the first 2 years of any kind of teaching life, I was obsessed with what the smart students were going to think about me because I thought that's where the class is. And this is something that all of us tend to do. If the student who seemed most articulate in the classroom seemed to come out and come congratulate me for a good class, I thought I have won it all today. Um, but this was the problem, especially if you come from a place where students can't relate to you or recognize you because of how you speak English or how you dress yourselves or how you look. This becomes a problem because they are refusing to see you as a teacher. Um, they were smarter, clearly. I didn't know what to do with some of the problems I was having. I had a very bad habit of taking personal stories to the classroom and undoing them in the classroom in the hopes that they could see me as vulnerable and then exchange of stories could happen. But this backfired because the smart students were very quick to recognize that this is not learning, this is definitely not teaching also. And I had to convince somewhere to all of these students that storytelling is teaching. Um, I'll give you an example. If we were talking about, let's say, um, migration in the city, I could only talk about it in terms of, I couldn't take a theory to the classroom and then say, these are the popular theories around migration. This is blah, this is that. I've never been able to do that, and I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. Because my idea was simple. Do I know any stories of migration myself? My father, my mother migrated from villages to the city. What do I know about that? Why did they come here? So we began talking about migration from that simple story. What I know about my family was that my father moved to the city because he loved Chinese food. Um, and somehow, when I tried to convince my students that there is something here, again, I got lost because they were not used to the idea of the anecdotal as the political. Now, there's nothing political about a man liking Chinese food. So they weren't trained in taking that very seriously. But now it becomes my job to make them look at it politically and also seriously. But here's the other question that I had at this point. Why must I politicize something just to get students to take it seriously? Why can't I just tell them something for no love of politics, simply for the love of telling stories because something was funny or something was witty? Is there room in the classroom for that kind of casual storytelling where it doesn't merit to anything important or anything political? That was my initial irritation. But several months down the line, I began noticing that um, I didn't really fit in as a teacher in the classroom because I didn't know how to theorize things. I didn't know how to complicate things. And all of the teachers from my high school and college were very good at doing that. They would take something really simple and complicate it until the students had to grudgingly learn to respect them. Especially in the humanities, I don't know if teachers deliberately tend to intellectualize things so that the sciences take us seriously. But I was never able to politicize something or theorize something to the point where the student is just helpless. I couldn't do it to them because I couldn't understand these teachers myself. But I could see that in the academia that I was coming from, these were the teachers that were most respected and most feared. And respect and fear are two things that teachers need immediately as soon as they join the profession. So, what do I do? When it became clear to me that I was definitely not making any kind of progress with the smart students in the classroom, I was forced to look at what was happening in the other side of the classroom, which is that there were students also who were just like me, who I had not noticed. And it made me feel very ashamed that I hadn't noticed them before. And these were students who were just like me, meaning they were as helpless as I was in the school. They didn't have that many friends. They looked out of place. They felt out of place. They wanted to run away home. They struggled with English. They were quiet in the classroom. And when I noticed that these were students who were taking me seriously, not because I was making sense to them, but because they saw themselves in me, that gave me a little bit of a reason to stand up straight and pay attention to it. Because at this point, it wasn't the students who were very articulate, who were looking at me. It was the students who were seeing themselves in me because they were themselves as inarticulate as I was. Um, that is the moment where I felt slapped and I felt like, okay, now this is why I am here. When that moment happened, I began to redefine my own sense of what I was expected to do in the classroom. When I first joined, I had asked a professor of mine, when will I feel like a teacher? Because I don't feel like a teacher. Um, I mean, I 5 minutes before class, I'm looking at Wikipedia and trying to go and paraphrase things that I've by hearted on Wikipedia. Is this what teaching is? And he said, no. And I said, when will I feel like a teacher? I don't feel like a teacher at all. And he said, you will feel like a teacher when a student will tear your ass. Um, the grossness of the statement slapped me, so I kept waiting for that moment, and I was terrified of that moment. I thought that moment is going to come, and the very super smart student is going to ask me a question that is going to tear my ass. But surprisingly, I did feel that ass stare, but it didn't come from a student who was super articulate or super smart, but it came from a student who was just like me. And that's why the tear burnt even more. That's why the pain was much more immediate. And I think I can still feel it even to this day. What do I mean by that? I was teaching Romeo and Juliet to a class of undergraduates in an optional English class. This is a BA journalism optional English psychology class. And when it comes to literature like Romeo and Juliet, obviously the teacher who walks into this classroom is expected to know Shakespeare, is expected to know some history, some Elizabethan things, some quoting lines verbatim, etc., etc. Because that's how I imagined English teachers also in my own stupid head. I'd imagine that teachers who teach Shakespeare are able to quote him at the drop of a hat, are able to talk about Romeo's passion and about Juliet's love, etc., etc. I was very lost because even though I'd read the play carefully, I could point out to things in the text that were making me giggle, that was making me happy, but somehow I wasn't able to translate my own pleasure into things that are worth learning in the classroom. And in the classroom, that's what's supposed to happen, right? You take you take something like Romeo and Juliet and examine the phrase, break it down. We tend to use it very often these days. I broke it down for them, meaning that I am of such superior quality that I can take something very complicated and break it down very simply to people who don't know as much as I do. Um, Essentially, that's what teachers are supposed to do. That's what they're required to do. In Romeo and Juliet, at one point in the text, there's something called the medlar fruit. And when I looked up this medlar fruit, I think Romeo or one of Romeo's friends talks about a woman's behind and compares it to the medlar fruit. And I was very puzzled by this, so I went and looked it up. And I found out that the medlar fruit resembles a woman's buttocks, and that's why that comparison was made. I was looking at this picture of the medlar fruit, and I was very puzzled by it. My father, who was passing by around that time, he looked at the fruit and he said, "I've eaten this." I said, "That's not possible. It's called some medlar fruit. It grows only in London." I said. He said, "No, that's not true. This is chipekai. I've had this in my childhood," he said. And I was very puzzled. And I started talking to him more about his fascination with chipekai. He said, "I've never had this now. I used to have it when I was a young person. We used to go to school and there was a tree on which a fruit like this used to grow. We used to aim stones at it, pull it down, and then eat it and run away. And its seeds were apparently very fascinating because you could eat the seed as well, but only after 15 days. Now, here's the catch. The only biggest orgasm that I had from Romeo and Juliet came from this stupid story that my father told me. Why should a student sitting in a BA optional English class care about this story? They have no reason to. But I have every reason to go to them with my big eyes and tell them, this is what I was able to discover. Why did this story give me that much pleasure? Because of my father's fascination with fruits. As a young Dalit boy, his relationship with fruits is much and a lot different from my relationship with fruits. And if I'm here trying to tell the students this is exactly how his eyes became when he was talking about this fruit, my father has no relationship with Shakespeare. He has no relationship with Romeo and Juliet. But the idea that a medlar fruit is able to, and Shakespeare is sitting where? So far away from India. If this man is able to give my father memories of a fruit that he had as a child, academically it is not relevant at all. But I wish it was. For me, today, at the moment, academia is about that. It's about shifting the focus and the center from talking about things in a very academic, in a very academically language oriented way, into orienting them into the language of pleasure, the language of storytelling, the language of anecdote, and to figure out a way in which both my father and Shakespeare can both be present in the classroom when I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet. That, for me, is the essence of storytelling and also academia today. Uh, then here's what an anecdote like this can do in the classroom. For the student who wants to talk about, so when I was talking about the medlar fruit, a student who was very, very bored at this point put his hand up and said, uh, what do you have to say about the catharsis, pathos about Aristotle, something, something, something. I hadn't read Aristotle. Clearly, the student had. And I couldn't understand why, in the middle of my father's fascination with the medlar fruit, I am supposed to accommodate some students' knowledge about Aristotle, even though it was very relevant. But here's the tucker. I must convince the class that my father is as relevant to Shakespeare as Aristotle is. But the student has the language in which to convince the class, and I don't. So, what happens to the idea of power? I had to accept defeat that day, and I said, I don't know, I haven't read Aristotle. Um, and little by little, the student was able to sort of get more students convinced that I'm not qualified to teach Shakespeare, which may very well be true. But what does it mean to be qualified to teach Shakespeare at this point? Um, in the history of uh, Indian academia, I don't know if there are more instances of teachers struggling to make themselves relevant in the classroom. And this is why I feel storytelling is of great use in Indian academia because it punctures power somewhere. Because what happened to me that day in the classroom, although it was very humiliating and insulting, was that I finally understood my job there in the classroom. 2 days later, I had to explain to the very same class concepts of synecdoche and metonymy, um, because they occur in Romeo and Juliet. And I had no idea how to talk about these concepts because these concepts had also confused me very much. Synecdoche is, and you should probably correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure I'll get it wrong. When a part represents the whole, or the whole represents the part, or some such thing. Um, and I didn't know how to talk about these things. Thankfully, I found a very hilarious short story that could explain synecdoche and metonymy online somewhere. Uh, and I was so fascinated with this short story because it was a double innuendo kind of story. If I if I could for sure tell you the meanings of synecdoche and metonymy, I would give you the name of the story and we could all sit and talk about it. But I still haven't understood those concepts myself. But here we go. So I thought to introduce these concepts, let me read out the story for them. And it was a longish story. And I read the story out. It took about 10, 12 minutes. And at the end of the story, the same boy, the Aristotle boy, uh, he gave up. He gave up because I think my incompetence as a teacher of Shakespeare was very visible that day. And he just put his head down in big sigh. And I felt very defeated when I saw it. I thought, this is the end of my career. This is a boy who's very articulate. Everyone loves him and he's doing this in the class. Everyone is seeing this. And I could feel the heat just pulsating across my body. And I thought, oh, I should just quit and leave. This is it for me. But then there was a girl who was sitting in the front. I love this girl to bits today. She didn't speak very often, and she was terrified of her own classmates because of how well they spoke. Um, she was interested in psychology, zero interest in Shakespeare or English. Uh, but this story fascinated her for some reason. So she previously would put her head down, but was listening to the story very intently. She put her head up and said, that is fascinating to me. Could you please explain that one more time? And I don't know if she said it because I was struggling and she'd seen me struggle, or I don't know if she said it because she hated that boy. But either way, there was a spark of faith and confidence back in my body again, because a girl who no one had paid attention to in the classroom was putting her head up and saying, listen, this synecdoche metonymy thing is super. I want to know more. Please tell me. And I felt great love for this student, great affection for this student. And I thought, okay, I don't care if this boy has put his head down. This girl is putting me up somewhere. Let me try. I'm telling you these moments in a very haphazard, disorganized way because my mind is like that. It's like a map at this point. But I'm giving you these moments, hoping that you'll be able to catch the many ironies of the classroom and what it means to teach in a classroom where certain things are expected of you, but you're not able to deliver them. But if you're able to deliver some bit of it in your own style, what happens to those people? And multiple other things like that. um, to go back to the storytelling idea and storytelling in Shakespeare, storytelling in Romeo and Juliet, there were multiple other moments in the text that I found deeply fascinating. And my inability as a teacher to convert them into the language of the academic shouldn't have allowed, I mean, it shouldn't mean that the student should end up paying for it. Because one very valid question that you should ask me at this point is fine, you're talking about storytelling and your father in Shakespeare. But if the student has to answer a central university question paper, let's say 2 years later, and they're required to study Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet, and there is a question on Aristotle's Poetics, how are they supposed to answer it if the teacher doesn't? Which is a very valid question. I didn't know how to address this question myself for a long time, but I think now I'm at a place where I think I can answer it confidently. My job as a teacher is to not know all of the answers, but if I'm able to push this few students who are interested into uncovering Romeo and Juliet in as many ways as possible, so that finally 2 years later when they're answering that central university question paper, they don't have to remember my lecture on Aristotle to be able to answer that. They need to look at their own curiosity to be able to answer that. And it is possible. It is possible to crack even horrible central university question papers based on how curious you have. Um, the NET, the National Eligibility Test, something that all of us here hate and are disgusted by, etc., etc. I was once having a very heated argument with a colleague of mine because I said this test is just senseless. Because when I went and wrote my NET, I remember question, it was this: who was the governess in Uh, Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina in chapter 1. Was she French, British, Russian, or English? No, French, English, Russian, or Canadian, something like that. And I said, what a senseless question. Why am I expected to remember what the ethnicity of some governess is in chapter 1 of Anna Karenina? And I fought with my professor and said, this is a horrible test. What is it actually testing? It's testing your memory, blah, blah, blah. And he said, no, it's actually a very deeply interesting question because she, as it turns out, is an English governess. And these are Russian kids. She's an English governess for Russian children. And that is a deeply political thing in Tolstoy's world. And I said, but why am I expected to remember? He said, if you've read the book very carefully, it's one of the first things you will catch. So I said, wait, are you telling me that the NET is actually a great test to test teachers' eligibility? He said, no, but it somewhere down the line, it's a very flawed test, yes. It's a horrible test. It should be banned and some should be replaced with something else. But it does test something. How closely you've read a text. I said, no, I disagree with this. Why am I supposed to require it to remember dates and things like that? How is it going to help? He said, if you are a careful reader, the fact that an English governess was babysitting Russian children should have done something to you. And that puzzled me. And I, I think about that even today very often when I'm reading a book. I'm thinking about what I'm actually paying attention to when I'm reading. Um, I think much of how I'm reading and writing has changed after my experience in the class. Uh, there used to be a point where anything and everything that I read already became material in the classroom for me. And I would sit and make notes about uh, these are the points we can talk about because this is very political, etc., etc. I stopped doing that the day I realized that that lesson that that girl taught me. She also found my father's fascination with the medlar flute very interesting, and I reassessed my own relationship with the classroom and decided this is the student I'm supposed to teach, not the Aristotle guy. The Aristotle guy needs new teachers. He is already a teacher, so he will find all kinds of teachers to teach him everywhere else in the world. But my attention should be maybe on the girl who was sitting there trying to figure out what synecdoche and metonymy mean. I think once this happened, um, my relationship with teaching relaxed a little bit. Um, I was guided a little more by my own curiosity with reading to figure out what I should do in the classroom. And that's been one of the biggest gifts of teaching. I was able to build something for myself outside the classroom. And every time I go into a classroom now, and I have these 50 minutes, I don't think about the 50 minutes in terms of how much knowledge can the students have in the 50 minutes. I'm thinking about how can I build a learning experience for them in 50 minutes that can make them feel like they can read anything and feel like they can understand it at a very curious level. I think that's become my job. Um, I was writing a paper on Shakespeare a year ago, and um, I was fascinated with Shakespeare's journey as a writer, even though there are controversies in politics about whether he is actually the author of his works, etc., etc. Um, I'm very curious about how a man who was a glove maker's son was able to teach himself and become one of the most famous playwrights in the whole world. So this paper I was writing couldn't get over the fascination. And my editor, who was sitting in the US somewhere, kept asking me to be a little more mindful of the fact that Shakespeare is a white man and you are doing a disservice to Ambedkar by uh, talking about Shakespeare in this fascinating way. And I thought, screw you. I mean, if I want to find, uh, see, if I can bring my father into a room in the classroom where I'm teaching Shakespeare, why can't I bring Ambedkar? For me, the idea that he was a glove maker's son can't be eliminated. In India, the moment you say glove maker's son or glove maker's daughter, the whole thing changes. Someone who's worked in leather, being able to have children who later become the biggest playwrights in the world, why must I eliminate that? And even if glove making in India is very different from glove making in London or Stratford or wherever he came from, why should that not fascinate me? Um, so she said, no, you have to be mindful. You have to critique his race. You have to critique him as a white man. I said, I'm not interested in critiquing him as a white man. The fact that he's a white man is maybe relevant to Savarna academicians. I don't care he's white. I mean, that is also today Indian pedagogy and Indian academia is borrowing so much of its critiquing style from Western academia that the moment race enters the picture, we feel as if we are absolved of caste, but we are not. And that is very interesting to me. Why is it that Indian academics who are sitting in the West are going on and on about race and they don't want to talk about caste? So, this is what I told my editor. I said, I'm not interested in Shakespeare's whiteness because for me, maybe Brahminness is more closer than someone's whiteness. Uh, Maybe Shakespeare's whiteness doesn't impact my reading of him, and it doesn't have to. Why must I borrow from an academia that has insisted that race is crucial? Race is, of course, crucial, but maybe for me, at the moment, when I think about Shakespeare, I'm more interested in knowing how people in Bangalore who've never read Shakespeare, who have difficulty in pronouncing his name, are so quick to say Shakespeare when there are fights on the road. So I'll give you an example. Two people fight anywhere on Bangalore roads. One of them by mistake starts talking in English, and the other person is quick to say, you're not Shakespeare's daughter, or you're not Shakespeare's son, you don't speak in English. This relationship between English and Shakespeare is very fascinating. So these are some things that I was able to point out in that paper. And I wrote it very anecdotally and very personally and talked about my father's fascination with fruits for a paper that I'm writing for Bloomsbury, which is actually only interested in the post colonial interest in Shakespeare. The moment people talk about post coloniality or one of these big words, all of these eventually become excuses to not engage with something curiously. Uh, I have a bunch of two more anecdotes to share with you, but I think I will address them maybe in our interaction. I've already taken about 50 minutes and I told you I'll only take 20 minutes. I'm really sorry about that. But yes, I think uh, two words that I'd like to leave all of us with to think about a little more about this. One is the word curiosity, and what it means to be curious as a teacher and as a student. Um, and the other is a word close reading. What does it mean to read something very closely? Because I think these are two things that remind teachers often that they are still students. Um, and I think without that memory of what it was like to have been a student, we can't really teach. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Vijeta, for that. I think there are many thoughts and reflections. Uh, uh, so I'll sort of just invite Deeksha and Aishwarya to first maybe share their comments, and then yeah, we'll sort of open it up for everybody else.
Thank you, Shan. Thank you, Vijeta. Like all of the things that you said resonated a lot with me. Um, like one of my biggest fear is actually forgetting how I was like as a student. Like as the years pass and I'm more like I gain more experience as a teacher, I fear I might forget what it is like to be a student. And it had started to happen recently, but then I did my PhD coursework. and, And it really made me realize things haven't changed all that much. And it helped me find my footing back in the classroom. So that's one thing that I wanted to share, how we have to, at least certain things we have to sort of really hold very close to our hearts, especially where we come from, how it was for us when we were students, what kind of interactions we had with our own teachers, what did they contribute towards our own teaching and learning. So, for instance, I very clearly remember that we had a lot of discussions on gender and class within my own bachelor's classroom, but no discussion on caste, so to say, right? And it didn't strike me then, but when I went on to do my master's and then my MPhil, PhD, and I started teaching, and the syllabus of Delhi University also changed. It is then I realized that we didn't have all of these discussions within our classrooms. And for some reason, discussing caste becomes, it's a very, I don't know, sometimes it's a very terrifying ground also, because certain students do ask all kinds of questions. And it becomes, they put you in a spot when you're discussing caste, especially not so much gender, not so much class. So that's one thing. The other thing that I was also thinking about this talk before, I mean, a couple of days ago also, and today as well, was this idea of being relevant, like you also said, being relevant as a teacher within the classroom. And for me, it's a very strange territory, like my friends know it. Whenever I'm in a class, the students, let's say it's the first class and I enter, the students don't really recognize me as a teacher, right? So it's funny, but sometimes it's also, I'm like, what am I doing something wrong? Should I dress a different way? Should I speak differently? Should I look a little different? Sometimes when I'm teaching, some students from other classes would knock and enter and start chatting without really paying attention. So then I have to tell them I am the teacher. So in in uh, in scenarios like these, like I feel like this power of being a teacher and telling them that I am a teacher comes in a little handy, because it helps in setting certain boundaries. But otherwise, I feel that talking to the students and learning about their experience, because how they are relating to teaching and learning has certainly changed to how I related to teaching and learning. So for me, it's very important to actually ask them how, I mean, what kind of issues are they facing. But again, the problem is when I ask them for feedback, when I ask them for the issues, they're like, "No, ma'am, everything is okay. We are fine only." And they're not able to, in a way, they're not able to give me that kind of a feedback that I want, maybe I want them to say. So yeah, I mean, these two things, like being relevant, asking for respect, how do you get that respect? You definitely don't get it by being very authoritative in class. That's something that I've learned over the course of whatever like teaching years I've had, that students don't come to you when you show them authority, that I'm not, I will cut your marks, I will do this, I will do that. But it is definitely through inculcating a certain kind of curiosity. The other thing that I was thinking of when you were talking about academic language is plagiarism. Like how a lot of students who come to undergrad classrooms don't know what plagiarism is. And then teachers make such a huge deal about, you've written a plagiarized assignment, but they would never ask the student what were they thinking when they thought. Did they even know it was plagiarism? Do they even know what they're supposed to do in an assignment? So these certain basic questions that they get lost. I think, especially when teachers are dealing with things at a very theoretical level and at the level of jargons and these big words, but not really facing what the student actually is thinking of, or what kind of mindset they come with when they're entering, especially in English literature classroom. Contexts are very different. When I teach Homer, a lot of the students, they're like, why are we reading this? They relate more with Mahabharata, not at all with Homer. So you have to make it interesting. You have to tell it like a story and not like an academic text that you are teaching. So yeah, I mean, that's all.
The plagiarism, that's something many of us are grappling with as teachers, especially now with AI and everything, it's even more complicated. Um, uh, in the department where I teach, we've had a long-standing relationship and engagement with getting students to write and read in all our courses. So much of everything that they do comes from either they're reading or writing, because it's an attempt to getting them to look at themselves as thinking individuals and things. With plagiarism, I've understood um, two things. It's definitely irritating and it's an enemy for us and all of that. But it's also curious to see why students plagiarize. Um, just 6 months ago, I was speaking to a student who was sent to me because she had plagiarized an entire paper on T.S. Eliot, and it was clear that she'd plagiarized because when I was talking to her, I was asking her questions about what she'd written, and she had no idea what she'd written. And the first two said, and also ChatGPT, by the way, for teachers, if you're here, ChatGPT loves the word tapestry. So if you want to know if your students have plagiarized, just look for the word tapestry, and if you find tapestry, it's 100% ChatGPT. So it said tapestry, blah blah blah, and all of that. So I was asking her questions, and she had no idea what she'd written. So the my colleague who sent her to me had discovered that she's working part time at Starbucks, and she had like a very horrible background, and so he told me to speak to her. And while I was speaking to her, I understood he was able to uncover the fact that he asked for a marks card, and in a marks card she had failed general English, she had failed optional English, and so the teacher was like, my colleague was like, okay, you failed optional English, I can understand. Why did you fail general English? And she said, my shift at Starbucks begins at 3 o'clock, and the exam is at 1. I have to finish a 2 hour paper in 1 hour, go home, have lunch, and then sign in at Starbucks. And now this is something that, as teachers, I'm not sure if we are invested and curious enough about our students to know their backstory. What does it take? What does it mean if a student is hurrying with her exam that she has to finish in 2 hours? She's writing it in half an hour and running out. She will fail. And our system is not equipped to deal with students who are students and they're also managing 2, 3 jobs. She's now forced to plagiarize because she doesn't know what else to do. She has no time to read. She's in the degree only because she needs the degree, because she's trying to apply for jobs. She has an older, physically challenged brother. Her mother is a housemaid. Her father is no more. Father's passed away. And at this moment, it's important to ask the question, what are we really doing as teachers in order to help students like that? So we tried our best to pass her, because even though we are not we are not supposed to pass any kind of plagiarized submission, but what else can she really do at this point? I can't expect her to sit and read T.S. Eliot's Wasteland and write about it. And with the kind of with the NEP and everything, especially now when students are forced to pick 2 subjects and then deal with things like open electives and deal with things like some SEC course and that course and this course, there are so many deadlines. The student is already dealing with deadline after deadline. And this is interesting to me. I mean, are we in a position where we can identify why the student is plagiarized? If the student is plagiarized it purely out of laziness, yes, there's this whole other separate response to it. But this kind of plagiarism is coming from helplessness and desperation and not knowing what else to do. And that's something I don't think we're equipped to deal with.
Aishwarya and others also, I mean, people could sort of just use the raise hand feature, so we can just come to you after Aishwarya. Yeah.
Hi, Vijeta.
Hi.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. If if your class looks anything like this, I mean, I can imagine it would be a lot of fun for the students. And I certainly am not feeling nervous for a change because you made it very, conducive for a dialogue. So I just wanted to like acknowledge that. And I have a lot of thoughts, and they are perhaps very scattered at this moment. But I was really, I got curious when, I mean, when you like, I mean, by your definition of smartness,
Mhm.
I was wondering if it's intelligence or if it's knowing things,
Mm.
because certainly there is a clear distinction between the two. And in my little experience of teaching, I feel like neither the teachers, I mean students, though we can forget, teachers also don't have a sort of a way of understanding the intelligence of students, because they are also working with certain limitations, so on and so forth. So yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to say was actually that um, I, in my whatever experience, I have begun to sort of also empathize with that articulate,
Mhm.
knowledgeable student, because not it is not necessary that his or her access to his or her intelligence is there
Mhm.
for him or her to see. Oftentimes they are performing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
these roles because they think this is what it is supposed to be, a
Mm.
scholarly,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
whatever, this is what scholarship is, right? I mean, and we have plenty of examples, and the recent episode with Spivak and Anshul Kumar also sort of brought this into focus, that these roles are so cruel to you, in the sense that it never really sort of bridges a connection to yourself. And that story with about your father was so fascinating to me, because that's exactly the value of literature that I also try to extol, which is making you feel more present in the classroom.
Yeah.
And by being more present, I feel also that you're more closer to your body.
Mhm.
And uh, and and that sort of completely changes the equation, and suddenly you are more in, like, in access to your also your intelligence, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. And the second thing was that this is also something that I do, which is taking off from your idea of close reading. I was thinking of closed reading, where I literally shut off the doors
Mhm.
in my classroom, and I tell them that this is where you are, and now you speak without any context,
Mhm.
because all the like this whole interpretation business begins with you,
Mhm.
and you have to first interpret by reading. And whatever you do with your creativity and intelligence and imagination and so on and so forth, that's the basic structure on which we will build upon. So that first reading, and I feel it's also endemic in the larger like scheme of things, it's a problem in academia right now, that we don't do primary text reading. A lot of our discursive practices are about knowing what an expert has already said, and
Yeah.
entering the discourse through that
Mhm.
sort of channel, and espousing positions. So yeah, so this is something that requires a lot of teaching, a lot of reflection on teaching. And institutions need to recognize teachers like you, and who have such deep sense of what a classroom space has a potential of.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I mean, I would like to congratulate you, and you know, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts. It was also so thought provoking for me.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. Thank you for sharing them. Um, Now the first point you made about the smart student in the classroom. Um, I mean, it took me years to begin to even look at that with kindness. because I was myself so humiliated and irritated and frustrated with students because they were unwilling to look at me as a person who was trying. Caste became a big problem there. So I was convinced that they are not human because it's easy for me to deal with them in my head if I convince them that, oh, yeah, they are the villain. But yeah, as teachers, I don't think we have the luxury of seeing our students as villains. I mean, because as students, they can see teachers as villains, that they are right, that's their privilege, that's their luxury. Teachers just don't have that luxury. And it took me a long time to finally arrive at a point where uh, I don't have now the option of leaving any student behind, even if they are weak or smart or all of these terms that we are familiar with. Articulate, inarticulate, stupid, not stupid, very intelligent, great intelligence. Uh, and I think doing that is very hard. If you teach with the point of not leaving anybody behind, that also means I'll have to swallow my own imagined humiliations, real humiliations, and all kinds of humiliations. But I do realize that teaching is essentially about kindness. And in the stories I tell them, I'm also actually sort of showing them what this kindness can do for me and for them as well. But for me, the major enemy in the classroom now is, yes, the idea of smart and intelligent now has become synonymous with access to not even a certain kind of thinking, but a certain kind of vocabulary, and it's always English vocabulary. Um, so if I'm doing an Adichie or a Virginia Woolf in the classroom now, I first have to convince my students that they are politically, morally untouchable before I proceed with either Adichie or Woolf. I can't teach Through the Lighthouse now without a student asking me, why are you not talking about Virginia Woolf's racism? And if I'm talking about Adichie now, I can't talk about it without talking about her uh, comments on the on trans women. So I was talking about Woolf and Adichie, I think, in that resisting caste classroom one day, and the student asked me if why am I not engaging with Woolf's racism or with Adichie's transphobia, and um, I was trying to identify where this question was coming from, and it turns out the question was coming because of an irritation with talking about caste in the classroom. Um, and that's also something that comes up suddenly if the student hates talking about caste. Uh, this is also something that happens on social media. No? They will pick up something that is equally political sounding, and then they will challenge it and you won't know what to do. But in these situations, I've come to understand one thing. Like most of us, students in the classroom find it very easy to deal with race and talk about race, but they don't want to engage with caste. Um, and here's the thing, if I ask them a question like this, do you think people in India make friendships based on caste? They're quick to say no. I mean, I don't go around asking my friends, are you Brahmin, before making friends with them. Then I said, okay, do you think race affects friendship? And then they'll immediately say yes. And then I said, how is that? They said, because race you can see, caste you can't. So it's clear that race affects friendship and caste doesn't affect friendship that much. Um, the engagement and the desire to feel like people are, I mean, and when I say vocabulary, that's also what I mean. If a student drops the word um, Adichie or race in a classroom where I'm not talking about them directly, that will definitely have to shut me up. In another instance, a student was frustrated with the syllabus because it had a chapter from Malcolm X's autobiography where the N word was used. And they were like, how can you use the N word in a classroom like this? And then we are then forced to take the question back to caste. So now when students ask me about Adichie or Wolf, I ask them, do you know where your shit goes in the morning? And they want to know how it's relevant. Now it's very relevant. If you live in a cosmopolitan urban area and you have the luxury of not having to deal with your shit in the morning after you flush it, don't sit here and ask me questions about Wolf's racism. Meaning, clearly, you and I are both participating in the caste system, which is ensured that you and I don't ever have to deal with the shit after we flush the commode every month. Why? It goes somewhere in the septic tank and someone else has to go down there and unclog it for you. It's your shit. So that kind of thinking is uh, is a little complicated in the classroom. Um, Borrowing excessively from the language and the vocabulary of social media has made it challenging for students to think about how they're thinking things. So the moment you talk about a film, they can shut it down immediately by saying toxic masculinity. And then no conversation is possible after you've said toxic masculinity. But then if I say, think carefully about what you mean when you say toxic or what you mean when you say masculinity, and then they are forced to confront. So I have written about this. The film Arjun Reddy, for instance, we talk about it, and then there's immediately 5, 6 hands shooting up saying it's a toxic masculinistic film. Why are we talking about it? Blah blah blah. And one girl in the classroom said she felt she was seeing her life when she was seeing Arjun Reddy, because she said she was like Preeti in the film. I don't know how many of you watched the film, but I think it's an interesting film. She said she's like Preeti in the film, and everyone is like, why are you Preeti in the film? She has no dialogue till the intermission. How can you say that? He beats her up, blah blah blah. And she said, that is the kind of love I once desired. Am I going to be punished for it? And they were like, what do you mean by that's the kind of love you desire? She said, I wanted a man like that in my life who could tell me what to wear and what not to wear. And they said, that's gross, that's manipulative. And this was the problem, that the girl was trying hard to understand what they meant by toxic masculinity. And when I asked them to translate toxic masculinity into Kannada, which is what the girl was more familiar with, they didn't know how to translate it, even though they were also Kannada speaking. Now, this is interesting. You will watch a Telugu film and say toxic masculinity, and then you won't know how to translate that word to a regional language, but you know it's toxic masculinity. But I want this also to be addressed in the classroom. If the girl is saying she desires it, is there something wrong with it? Now, that's a question that nobody in class was willing to answer, because they're also woke enough to say no. I mean, they're woke enough not to say there is something wrong with you, there's something wrong with your desire. I'm talking about this now because I think in the classroom today, this name dropping, this eagerness to spill out vocabulary that can resist thinking is picking up very much. Garth Greenwell addresses this very beautifully in his essay called On a Moral Education, where he talks about Philip Roth and doing Philip Roth's books in his classroom and how students resist it. And he's saying, why am I required as a teacher to hand out a note of approval saying this person is politically great and they haven't said anything wrong or they haven't done anything wrong, you can read them. That's also a challenge. In a conversation on Jallikattu in my classroom, a boy who was again very articulate said animal cruelty, blah blah blah, and all that. And a girl from Tirunelveli who until then hadn't spoken much was so cheesed off that someone who wasn't even from Madurai or from Tamil Nadu was saying these things. She yelled at him in Tamil, and then she actually never shut back. She just kept talking a lot after that. And that was fascinating to watch because she was coming from a position of sharing her lived experience. And she was confronting that with someone else's just simple access to vocabulary. This is also where I prioritize storytelling over access to knowledge, access to words.
Would others like to share their reflections or thoughts or comments?
I saw 2, 3 hands up, but I'm not sure if.
Yeah, maybe we can take 2, 3 sort of responses first. Yeah, Ankita.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm just trying to start my video for some reason. Yeah, wasn't happening before. So thank you for sharing your classroom experience. And I've been teaching in high school for the past 3 years, you could say. And before that, I was living in rural spaces and, sort of trying to understand how education in Adivasi context looks like. Cut to that, now that I'm in Delhi and I am teaching from, say, 9th to 12th, in 10th, there's a chapter called Gender, Caste, and Religion. And I still find students engaging in gender, per se, women more than the male students. Religion becomes a little tricky, and then comes caste. When it comes to caste, I've noticed that CBSE often doesn't really get into what caste politics is or what caste is. And I remember this one instance where, and often students mix your economic background with your caste background, right? There is no, even when you talk about intersectionality, and if you notice the CBSE boxes, of course, CBSE boxes are present because the teachers can sort of neglect those topics. But very interestingly, there was a bit of such a committee report present in one of the boxes, and I was talking about it. And one student who wasn't paying attention, he just scrolls down to the last page. If you don't mind, can I share that with you? I could share my screen and show you the page. Is this visible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to zoom in, but I'm unable to. But if you look at this person, he is wearing a gold chain. Barely visible, but wearing a gold chain. And the discussion completely shifts, and he looks at me. He's like, yeah, but why is he claiming reservation? Why is he claiming anything? Look, he's wearing a gold chain. So just one material piece, possession, becomes your complete identity. Okay. And then I had to engage with the concept of want, desire, needs. And he's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. He's not poor enough. Without really engaging as to what the chapter is trying to tell you, or what I am trying to, I'm not trying to tell you anything, but I'm also trying to engage with you as to how much of it do you know, or do you want to sort of engage with. I tried doing this in my, so I was also teaching in an army school where caste comes with ranks. Okay. And I did this exercise as to how many of you, again, we all mix around in our own circles. So we never really bother to know the other person's caste because it's a Sanyal friends with Tripathi or a Gupta friends with an Agarwal. So we don't really understand it. But how many of us are aware about it? And it became, such a contention that I've had parents file complaints as to, oh my God, somebody is trying to talk about this. So, like at a university level, because I don't teach at a university level, so I'm not very sure. But at a school level, I find you're facing the battle of talking about caste, you're fighting it in multiple podiums. Like you're fighting it, of course, amongst your colleagues. You're fighting that battle with the student and also with the parent. Because now the parent and students are all your clients. And that is something, your conversation really, that is something, it took me to down to that lane where I was thinking as to how do we fight it. And my cope-up mechanism for it has to be, and it has been, is to perform my way through it sometimes, like as a teacher, you're performing in front of the crowd. And which character that you have to play to sort of also put your point across, but to defend yourself becomes very important, which is the power authority you're responding to then is something I started thinking about. So thank you. I just wanted to.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for
Uh,
sharing.
could we take maybe 2-3 more responses and yeah, or reflections? Yeah. So anyone else? Yes.
Hi, hi Vijeta. I'm so happy I attended this talk because as teachers at a university where exams become like the sole purpose of teaching at so many in so many instances, and colleagues also often discuss ki okay wo padhaya tha and then that came in exam. So I'm really satisfied. I'm really glad that you speak of these things because I also tend to take a lot of anecdotes and stories to classroom, and I'm also often kind of you met with so much resistance that this is not in cause. This, in fact, happened. The JNU violence happened once I like started speaking because I was so agitated about it, and it was my alma mater and so on. So I was like, how can they do this and that? And by the end of the class, the students like, you did not tell us what text to kind of teach that you're going to teach. And I was really sort of taken aback and really unhappy that even though what I was talking about, and this is still politics, this is not even like the kind of talks that you are saying, and which we really have to find some courage within us to even like bring that joy and fun in class. But even outright such politics are sort of dismissed by this really exam centered kind of approach. This your talk also took me back to my college days, and which I really like the fact that you built on from your experiences as a student to become a teacher, because I came out from a top college like in Delhi University, and there was this one class where the teacher was teaching Mill on the floss, and I was really interested with the brother sister relationship, and I took it to one of the tutorials, which are not even a classroom space; they are very informal. And this teacher took no interest in my, because I was like this is similar to my relationship with my brother, and it really sort of, I'm really angry at Maggie Tulliver. Why is she doing this? And and I really like that she cut her hair and so on, but really felt upset about how and how it was axed, like that conversation, because when it could not happen, I never finished Mill on the Floors. Like even though I love literature until then, I was like, "Meko nahi padna hai. I'm really not interested in this text." I still don't like George Eliot to this day because I could not engage with that like personal sort of experience. And then I just fatafat finished. And then like now as a teacher, and that sort of links to that JNU thing also. Now I really feel that, what experiences I had of shutting myself down entirely, not just in terms of sharing my life experience, but also my learning to some extent, that it really sort of, I'm not picked up another George Eliot, and I keep hearing other people, ki, you should read the other book, Middlemarch, I think it is, and such a beautiful book. And I've read fat books, so it's not as if I can't finish books, but it's put me off so entirely. It just stopped me. And then I thought that if this is what good teaching or whatever academically sound teaching does, that you just shut off like voices just to finish syllabus, then that's not an approach that that could encourage any kind of other sort of thinking. So I'm really sort of, this is not really a question at all. This is just again anecdotal sharing. It's just I really feel confident, in fact, to hear voices like yours, to be able to go back to that style in which, where a student will talk of Hermes bag in a Gogol class, and you would let the student talk and share that story so that we must just like have a light moment. So which is not syllabus oriented. So yeah, thank you for like, leading with that kind of space that you create for fellow teachers. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sunit. It was a pleasure to hear that. I must also tell you that I think this syllabus thing is crucial to talk about also, because yes, there is so much exam centeredness even in the way we talk to students that nothing experience itself has taken a backseat. I was doing Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse in a classroom, and just 5 minutes before entering the class, I had reached the most fascinating part of the book where Lily, I think her name is, she's painting, and Mr. Ramsey or whoever he is keeps interrupting her when she's painting. When people talk about To the Lighthouse in classrooms, they're talking so much about stream of consciousness and all of the theories surrounding Virginia Woolf. And I thought, screw all of it. This is such a great moment because she's just going to paint and he won't let her paint because he keeps interrupting her. He keeps trying to say, he basically is a man who is very unfulfilled when he walks into a room and people don't look up and immediately acknowledge him, which is so much like real life. I mean, all of the men in my family, if they walk into a room and if women immediately don't attend to them, they feel like their manhood is crumbling. And this is such a, she's, Wolf is building on real life experience in this page. And I thought this is beautiful. And to think that 100 years ago someone sat and wrote this down, and the painter Lily has found a very great way of escaping this tantrum when a man is won't let you go, he won't let you paint until you give him attention. He's like a child. And she wants to get back to painting because she's in that moment when she's getting the cloud right, and he's just standing there hovering around her, talking to her. So she just gets irritated. She looks down and she says, and he's going on about how difficult his life is. And she says, you know, I'm so sorry you have such a difficult life, but you're wearing such beautiful shoes. And then he feels very excited that she's complimented his shoes, and then he goes off. And then she gets back to her cloud. And I thought this is such a funny moment. And I thought this is great. She's packing, Wolf is packing a way for all women to get back to their art when men are constantly interrupting you. Give them a line and then go back to your cloud. That's what she's saying. And I talked about this in a class, and a girl got so carried away. Next day in the corridor, I overheard her. There was some boy who was mansplaining some cricket thing to her. And she got tired because she's a cricket fan herself. She doesn't need to be told what LBW is. And this boy wouldn't let go of her. And she looks down and she says, "You're wearing such nice shoes." And then she walked off. And I thought, oh my God, this is such a big hit. I thought this is a victory. If in Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, there is a small moment like this that has rescued a 17-year-old girl from being mansplained, I thought great. And I think much of what you're saying, you should definitely go back and finish Myth on the Floss because I think it will change your life.
Yeah, I think I must.
I have started it, but every time when they reach that Maggie cutting her hair bit, I've stopped. But I think you should definitely please go and read it. It's a victory to all of us if you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Vijeta, would you like to respond to the previous comment?
Yes, Ankita's, right? With caste, it's always tricky because the moment you talk about caste, in 5 seconds, there's a game I do in the classroom. I talk about caste, in 5 seconds, someone will say reservation. Almost as if that is the only thing about caste to talk about. Not the headlines every morning, not the rapes, not the killings, not the honor killings, not the beef, nothing else. I'm going to quickly just share one essay which was written by a student. She doesn't mention caste anywhere, and that's the trick really, because people are always wondering if this is really about caste. It is. This was written by a student who talks about getting an education in CBSE and ICSE schools, and how much, no matter her parents seemed to put her in these schools, she wasn't able to get the respect or ever feel seen and heard in the classroom. Um, People, yes, do think that reservation is about capital, but really it's about social capital. The one question we should probably ask people who make a fuss about reservation is, fine, you all make a fuss that people have taken reservation and come to the classroom, but how many of them actually even finish their degrees? Not many of them do. Not many of them even are able to survive in the classroom after getting reservation. Reservation isn't just about how many people have taken it, but also how many people have utilized it and been able to do anything for themselves after it. Even with the large scheme of things, reservation is still only a very small mercy that the system shows us. It's not enough. This essay should be, I do it annually in my classroom. It leads important questions about caste, teaching, learning, and the general scheme of ICSE and CBSE education also. I don't know if it will help you, but please do give it a read.
Thank you.
I'm also quickly going to leave my email ID here in case you want to come back and have more conversations about this.
Yeah, Asif.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So thank you, Vijeta. Um, it's always lovely to hear what you have to say about your own experiences in your classroom experience in general. And I'm grateful to you because there's something in the way you speak and the way you write that makes everyone comfortable and even heard in some ways. So I think the students who would generally not speak must also feel comfortable in speaking in your classroom. And I think that's a feat because I think we all aspire to come there. So I'm grateful for this talk and for your words in general. There's one thing that I was thinking about. Uh, uh, so I'm picking up on what has already been said by other people and what you said in the talk. And the thing that I want to focus on is vulnerability. So back in those days when I was in the BA classroom, I remember the experiences or the teachings that I still remember to this date centered around a teacher also opening about his or her own experience and connecting them to the text. And so many things have changed now. Students are more interested in when I have become a teacher and the classroom space itself has changed. Students are more interested in doing internships and not attending the classes, and uh, they are okay with writing chat GPT answers. And if you share, if you become vulnerable for a moment in the classroom, you can also be yawned at or laughed at because they're not interested and they also have attention span issues. So I don't blame them, but the classroom itself has also become a very reactive space, which can lead to like real life consequences. And I'll just speak from my experience teaching last semester. So I was teaching hard times. I know many students will find this text boring, but like I missed 2, 3 classes, and as a teacher who's also Muslim, comes from an OBC background, I'm also sensitive to how the politics of caste and class work in the class, and I do make points about it. But I received a complaint from the dean, like someone wrote a letter, not from the class, someone outside the classroom wrote a letter saying that in this glorious time of NEP and everything, this teacher is not teaching us because they're taking leaves. And I also felt that it was also because two of us were teaching this course, and I also thought that it was directed to me somehow because I am a Muslim. It was a chat GPT like letter, so it was also ironic. I also found it very funny because I was like, we're doing English, and that student also, and I also felt that that student is also coming from a certain political background. And then we discussed it in the class, and students didn't know that this had happened. So I'm saying, what has changed for you when it comes to being vulnerable in the classroom? Because the classroom has now become a very harsh and volatile space also in some ways, and it is more dangerous. So that is something I would like to know more about if you have some thoughts on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Asif. I'm not sure if contextually what I have to say will help you particularly, but um, I also think that somewhere, if uh, especially teachers who don't have the luxury of building their own syllabi, have to consciously make an attempt to fall prey to university demands about what needs to be taught at this level in an undergraduate degree. It's very difficult to outmaneuver that. In some cases, I've noticed that it's a very bad time to be a student. Politically, intellectually, emotionally, at this moment where we are at, it's a terrible time to be a student because we are burdening them with SEP, NEP, and constant changes, things like that. It's very difficult to sustain life as a student at this point, no matter who it is. And from my experience, when we build for them spaces outside the classroom to engage with things that they're not able to engage with in the classroom, it's some kind of mercy for them, some kind of kindness for them. And by that, what I mean is the classroom by default is a place where equality cannot happen. By default, it means that some people will always be left behind and some people will always continue to go ahead. At this point, I think it's important to set up alternative forms of classroom. And by that, I mean, it's unfair, really. The classroom is actually the most unfair thing for a student because they might have shown an interest in learning, but 100 things happen to compromise this for them, and the teacher has no idea what's happening. So at this point, and not all of them will excel at the demands that the classroom will place on them, because the classroom will have some measurements in which the students can either excel at or be very bad at. And it's unfair to the student, really. The entire system in which we do this is very unfair to them. And when I say alternative forms of testing, I mean, I've noticed that students who stutter don't volunteer in the classroom at all. But when we do these events and when we look for MCs, usually we only pick MCs who are very great at talking and keeping the audience engaged and things like that. We once had an event where the student who had this problem of stuttering volunteered to MC, and he MC'd and he stuttered throughout. But the kind of boost it gave his confidence after the event got over was unbelievable. He was able to show us something outside the classroom that he couldn't show inside the classroom. And I think even in the space of the classroom itself, the politics, even between students and their own personal fights with each other, all of this, unfortunately, is weighing down on each student individually. But if the teacher is available for them in small setups like the classroom, but not as formal as the classroom, like let's say a small event or an informal gathering, it gives the student more opportunity to find themselves in these moments. I don't know how many of us are academically free to do things like that. But if we have the opportunity to build an experience for students outside the classroom, we should grab those opportunities. Also, these are things that our teachers didn't do for us. They would never, I mean, how many of the teachers actually did invest time outside the classroom after 4 o'clock? I mean, are we still looking at teaching in the 9 to 5 frame? How many teachers are available on campus after 5? These are questions I think that should be centered around the student experience. I don't know if this addresses your question, but this is just a very, I think, over the top way of trying to understand where the student is at. I think if you're feeling vulnerable in the classroom, there's no real solution to that. I think you're doing a great job in not letting go of your vulnerability because it was questioned or challenged. I think you need to stick with it, go through with it, and just see where it takes you. There's no real solution to the moments in these classroom when they are charged in that. But I do know that when we take a personal interest in students outside the classroom, they become friendly faces inside the classroom. In some cases, that's happened. So I don't know.
Talat, you wanted to say something?
Hi. Thank you so much for sharing your inputs from your classroom. I'm a research scholar at NIT Patna and I'm also a TA there. So this thing happened with me at the time of Karnataka hijab row. As a hijabi on the campus, there were students who were like students who we were like engaging with in the classroom as the TA for their English teacher, and they were like simply making comments like "Mandir yahi banega," and also, do you have any suggestions or advices for people like me who are going to be in academia in 6 months or year time? Do you have any suggestions or advice for us to how to navigate this situations like these?
And what you've been through is way tougher than anything that I've ever come across. So I don't know if anything that I say will help you, because especially if you're meeting students like that on campus who are not there to learn or even to make friends, or there to just strike up conflict. Um, in some cases, in smaller degrees, humor seems to have helped me. Um, and humor in 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 the most unexpected of ways, sarcasm and humor. Um, I had my professor who uh, was new to the classroom and very young and looked like a teacher at all. Uh, because he had long hair, he got asked, "Do you put coconut oil in your hair?" as a way of, and he was in the middle of teaching something, and the student interrupted it to ask that question. It's also a way of, power and pull and things like that. So this teacher said, "Why, where do you put coconut oil?" And all of the students just started laughing, and then they made fun of the student. See, I don't know if I'm just giving you an example to show you uh, how even in some very serious moments, humor seems to have helped some teachers, especially the young ones. Humor has always helped me. Um, I do this thing where if there are boys, tough boys, and big politicians' sons and sports people's sons, they're the ones who usually are very troublesome to deal with in the classroom. And when I encounter such boys, I either just laugh at them or get the entire class to laugh at them. That's one thing. Laughing helps because it's a way of also making making friends. Um, Taking them seriously and roughing them up and threatening them, all of these are things that I've tried, but they've never worked for me. Because I tend to carry it outside the classroom and it irritates me through the day. Humor has helped me. When I say humor, I don't mean uh, at the expense of someone's self respect. I just mean it in terms of some casual poking and things like that. It's also a way of engaging them and reminding them that they are students and that they're here to learn. I'm sorry, I don't seem to have the correct way of addressing all of these concerns, probably because I haven't been in these situations myself.
Anushka?
Hi, Vijeta. Thank you so much for just creating this kind of space where a lot of us who feel very much not part of academia in a lot of ways are able to find some kind of community in your talks, in your writings. And I think I also have a lot of blabbing points that a lot of the people have already repeated. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was, sometimes students, no matter what you bring to the class, almost all refuse to engage or do some kind of whataboutery, which I have noticed happens a lot. So I had actually brought your very essay for a group discussion, hiding behind language. Now, one of the interesting things that happens in my class, and I think every class now, because of ChatGPT and AI, is that they figure out what it is about. They figure out two things that they can say. They say that, and it becomes very repetitive, which either they don't pay attention to, or they just want to get done with it, right? So then I only pick up things like, the article talks about toxic masculinity, and so in my class, weirdly, people started talking about toxic femininity after that. Yes. And then I just, one of the things I've observed is, rather than shutting them out, sometimes I ask them, okay, what do you mean by that? Talk about it, explain it to me, because I don't know what it means. And I mean, this is really stupid, but one student said,
Pandra? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. When I
Yes.
take a text to a classroom, I now usually get them to ask me one question about the text. And it could be any question from any part of the text. And I read out the questions in the classroom and I try to answer them, because that gives me a sense of whether the student has read the piece or not. The other thing is, many students don't know this, but if they are made to realize that the things that they are saying and writing in the classroom is knowledge production, then they take themselves a little seriously. They need to be convinced that whatever they are saying in the classroom, we are listening, and that whatever they are writing, we are reading. At some 2 months ago, when this girl's story I told to some people in my class, I told them, the day you feel like I'm not reading you anymore, please plagiarize. And I think that gave them the confidence to feel like whatever they are writing, even if it's one sentence, if I can show them that I'm reading it very seriously, they tend to take their writing a little more seriously. So even before I get them to talk about the things we read in the classroom, something that helps me is getting them to write about it. Writing is like thinking, which is why most students will resist it. They hate writing. They will not write in the classroom. If I tell them to write 4 lines, they will roll their eyes. But I think as a practice now, and I say things like no attendance, blah, 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 and all of that. So they're forced to write. And when they're forced to write about the thing that they've just read, it forces them to think about what they want to say. I discourage absolutely talking, because once they finish writing, I get them to read what they've written. It's a good way for me to keep in touch with where they're thinking and how they're thinking. So I have convinced them that when they're writing, they're actually showing me what they're thinking, and I'm very interested in that. That tends to help me. Sorry. That, and yeah, I think that's one thing that's helped me inevitably in the classroom. The other thing is, and this is an experiment I'm very scared of doing, but I think I will recommend it, is to, when they are writing in class, I also write with them. It's a way of saying, I think many students also resist writing because it makes them very vulnerable, because they tend to feel like I'm not thinking properly or I'm writing something wrong. But if I show them that I'm also writing with you, which means I'm being vulnerable with you and I'm going to share what I've written with you, it gives them some kind of confidence to feel and be wrong. If they don't have a reason to feel afraid of being wrong, I think most students will administer and volunteer to tell us what they're thinking. So for me, when I write, I become vulnerable. And I show them that this is the process that we have to both engage in. So let's say I'm doing a text and I tell them, give me 2 lines in response to this question. When they're writing, I am also writing for the same question. And when they see that, when they see me also writing, it tends to make them feel a little more like they can trust me. So I think ultimately they're trying to see if teachers will also fall with them and die. And if we can show them that, listen, I'm also on the same boat with you, I'm also sinking with you, they'll be more willing to take the risk.
I had a sort of question. I mean, it's something I've been thinking through for a while. So, I mean, in a classroom, and I have the privilege of, working with a lesser number of students and also controlling the syllabus and the text or the lack of text in a class. And and the way in which students are kind of expressing themselves is mostly through stories and through personal reflections. And it's a course on education. And what happens is that a lot of the reflections are rooted in trauma. And because that seems to be sort of dominantly what what people have experienced all through school. And and when I sort of read these stories and when I then discuss them with students, I feel vulnerable too, and I feel affected by these stories. And often I feel like, okay, in that moment, I'm able to, of course, give an emotional response, but I also need to say something about their writing and about how they could perhaps sharpen what they're saying or think more about it, because those are also tasks I have to do as a teacher, and those are institutionally mandated. And I'm not always sure how much I want to do that, because uh, it seems to make the conversation a little inauthentic at that moment, right? It feels like I'm suddenly abstracting, whereas I want to think with the story. And the other kind of, I don't know if it's a problem, but the other effect is that I end up carrying some of that, pain, and often, like, I'm coming back from class and I'm just carrying that in my body. And I once talked to this education psychologist, and she said that, okay, you have to de-roll. If this is your pedagogy class is over, you de-roll. And I don't really know what that means. So I'm very curious, like, how does one navigate this? I mean, on the one hand, it is important to be affected. On the other hand, when you carry so much because you're receiving so much from students, then it's also quite exhausting. So
Yeah, 100%. I I don't understand. I mean, like you said, even I don't understand what de-rolling means. And I think as teachers, um, we can't do that. Uh, it's not possible to not feel affected or uh, to build something for yourself where you leave that role and then step into another role when you leave the classroom. It's not in the nature of teaching. The occupation simply doesn't allow you to do it, even though psychology has always pretended to have answers to all of these questions. I have zero faith in psychology, especially the way it's practiced in India, where it's practiced like a science. So I don't think psychology has the answer to this question. I do think that um, there's no other way but to go in it fully and to allow yourself to be affected by it. Um, the Because my comfort comes from the fact that there are also days when the opposite happens, meaning I go to classroom 5 minutes before where I have wanted to call off a class because I'm just not feeling it. I feel like I don't have it in me, no energy, been up since 5 setting 10,000 question papers, correcting answer papers, fight at home, fought with everyone, and then I'm exhausted. I have no energy to go into the classroom. Just messaging the students on the group saying I won't be able to take class today. And then I go into the classroom somehow because I feel like, okay, never mind, I can't schedule it later. And I find that the experience is so rewarding that I feel energized by it. And that gives me the energy to even survive the bad days where the opposite has happened, where I've allowed one person's or one student's story to affect me so badly that it's just taken my entire body over. It's like an exchange thing, because I know that in my worst days, if I've gone to the classroom, I have come out feeling refreshed and energized. If that can happen, I should be okay to for the opposite also to happen. I mean, there should be room in my body to accommodate both kinds of days. And I think that's what teaching is about. It takes from you, but it also gives. And when it gives, my God, it gives so much.
are there any more reflections or thoughts? Yanidhi.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, we've been talking a little bit about remembering what it was like for you as a student and how that plays a role in teaching. I also wanted to understand if there's ever a time where remembering who you are as a student, who you were as a student, or what it was like for you, is limiting in the classroom, and how do you deal with that?
Mm, it is, more than limiting, it's very embarrassing for me to think of my time as a student because I did so many stupid things. But I also did it. My stupidity was very visible to teachers who were very unkind. So I think back, I think back to that moment where not just when I was a student, but the kind of teachers I had who were very limited in their way of thinking, meaning they were very unimaginative. I'll tell you, if someone needed, so here's the thing: if a magazine needed to be edited or someone had to write something for the magazine, they'd pick the student with the best English. How can you get? I mean, can you get more unimaginative than that? Shouldn't the job go to someone who wants to learn, not someone who is already good at it? I mean, I'm sure you want to produce the best magazine, but so what happened was the same student got stuck with the role of the editor of that magazine again and again and again, so much so that she stopped investing in it completely. And there were many other students who were vying for that job, not because they wanted to be editor, but they wanted to know what it was like to edit. So I tried not to make the same mistakes that my school teachers did, which was favoring one student over and over again because they spoke good English. And while it seems like our classrooms are much more evolved than that, and we are more evolved, so we won't make those mistakes, it's actually also very easy sometimes in the grid of the day to make the same mistakes. Because when you want to get the job done, you will entrust it with somebody who you don't have to sit and explain it to. It's in those moments that I have to be extra cautious and remember, no, even it can't be the student's fault that stuck in a busy day and I want the job done. So I'll give it to someone who's naturally good at it. So constantly reminding myself that one thing has been very challenging. The other thing is also the desire to, there are days when I go and give only 40% of myself to a class. And one boy will finish class and come and tell me, my God, that was so good. Thank you so much. I feel so good. And I feel so guilty because I'm like, dude, I gave you only 40%. And I feel like if I give my 100%, how much more can it do? And that's also something that makes me feel like in that 50 minutes I have to do magic. So I think of teaching really as a magician's task. I have to take a text and make butterflies come out of that text. uh, that's my goal for the next 50 minutes, and if I do that and if only one student is able to catch one butterfly, that's more than enough.
Thank you.
So it's been a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot that we have shared and thought about. And thank you so much, Vijeta, for initiating and facilitating this conversation for all of us. It was really lovely listening to you and listening to everybody. So on that note, would like to sort of, conclude this session. And yeah, I mean, do stay in touch. Vijeta has shared her email. You can also write to Aina, and and we'll also share. I mean, we have already emailed you, so we'll also share the video and hopefully a summary of the session over email once it's ready. And we hope to have more sessions in the future. And yeah, we invite all of you to keep joining. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much, Aina, for organizing this. It was great. Thank you for a good Sunday.
Yeah, and just one clarification though, it's organized in collaboration it's a collaboration between Aina, so I'm a member of Aina, and there's Deeksha, who's teaching at Zakir Husain College,
Okay.
and Aishwarya, who coordinates the English Researchers Collective at Jamia.
Thank you, Deeksha,
Yeah.
Aishwarya, Sayan, and Annie. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, everyone.